Jeff Morgan.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Morgan. I flew in last night from Dallas, Texas. You know, I got involved in this a few years back. Like many of you, I got blindsided. At the beginning, you're like, what do? You have no idea what to do. And I was glad to see that there were people around, people that have gone ahead of us to give us some ideas. Brian Kinter, Don Rufty, John Gentry, I just heard of for the first time today, but so many people that when you're going through it at the beginning, you're like, I don't even know how to begin to handle this stuff. You just caught so off guard. There's a sense of shame, embarrassment, everything that accompanies it. When I think about some of the stuff we're talking about, I look at the whole umbrella of the family abuse and family destruction industry. And the entire industry and all facets of it are built on lies. So take, for example, the tobacco industry. Many years, they denied that smoking causes cancer. They denied that nicotine was addictive. They denied that they were marketing to our young kids. They denied the damage of secondhand smoke. They wanted to make a safer cigarette, but then they said, boy, if we make a safer cigarette, we're going to actually be acknowledging that there's danger here. How many people have died, emphysema, lung cancer, other things, because of cigarette smoking? And I understand that people smoke here. I'm not referencing that, but...
Stop making fun of us.
No, I'm not doing that.
No. We're just trying to stay warm.
Yeah, just trying to stay warm, exactly.
Yoga.
But you know, I used to be a missionary overseas, and I heard this complaint from people overseas. The cigarette companies are giving our kids free cigarettes. They have these parties, and they're giving them free cigarettes. Why? So they will have lifetime customers. It did not matter how many people were damaged or killed along the way. It was an industry that was built on profiting off of the destruction of individuals. I read one report recently that said by the year 2030, they anticipate 10 million people a year dying because of cigarette smoking. The abortion industry. You look at the abortion industry. For how many years did they say, that's not a living person, that's not a living baby inside of a woman, that's just a blob of cells. Abortion is a loving thing to do. You don't want to trap this girl or a lifetime of poverty. Abortion is a private decision between a mother and her daughter. Poor people need to have abortions. Or sometimes, if you look at the history of it, certain ethnic groups needed to have abortions. You look at Roe versus Wade, since then we've had 60 million babies or more that have been killed. Another industry that destroys families based on lies. What we've been focusing on in Texas is the divorce industry. If you've seen the movie Divorce Corp, you know some of the damages that. If you have not seen it, I urge you to see it. $50 billion a year industry. Now, what type of lies did the divorce people tell us? Kids just want their parents to be happy. No, kids want their parents to learn to love each other and get along and keep the family together. Kids are resilient. No. Kids have been broken and silenced. It's what's going on. You look at Judith Wallerstein and her book, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, a 25-year study. Judith Wallerstein thought there would be no problem with divorce. She studied a group of people, white middle class or upper middle class, people who wanted to have an amicable divorce. 25 years later, she kept on following up on these people. The results were devastating. Devastating. Imagine what happens to our poorer communities, the different minority communities. Another lady just recently, Lila Miller, wrote the book Primal Loss. The now adult children of divorce speak out.
Amen.
70 people that are speaking out on what happened to them during divorce. The words that they use: loss, devastation. It led to antisocial behavior, sociopathic behavior, all of these different things. We've been told kids are resilient. No, they've been broken. And many times they've been silenced. By the way, in Texas, if you want to talk about issues of constitutionality and opposing unconstitutional laws, we are planning again to challenge the issue of no fault, that is unilateral divorce. Because in no fault divorce, in the majority of instances, by far, one person is forcing divorce on another person. That person has no rights. No due process rights that we're talking about. Why should we be surprised if we don't get due process rights in family court when from the very beginning we don't have due process rights? Or our children don't have due process rights? We need to go back to that. I'd encourage you to watch Texas next year. We are going to be challenging this once again, and I think we have a better chance of actually getting it repealed. By the way, unilateral divorce violates this policy of the state of Texas. So why is the state of Texas saying, this is our policy, but we're allowing this practice to destroy families? The child support enforcement industry, another industry that destroys families. And I can speak about Texas. Back in October of last year, I was at a meeting when our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, was speaking. And I said, would you be willing to meet with the parents of children who feel that the child support orders, the way that you enforce them, is abusive? And he said yes. So as he's walking out, I said, well, how do we get a hold of you to do this? So he gave me a name and somebody's number. I put out a YouTube video, and before you knew it, all these people were calling up the Attorney General's office complaining. And this one lady's taking the calls, and she's saying, yours sounds like it's a particularly bad case. And the guy would say, oh no, mine's not bad at all. It's as if there was this big disconnect. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, I think in a number of ways he's good. I think in child support and what he does to help destroy families is horrendous. It's going to be tough, though, to convince other people about that. They love him because he has sued President Obama so many times. And in fact, our governor and the Attorney General used to have these conversations about who's sued Obama the most, who's on track to suing him the most. This comes directly from the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. However, when you look at the child support enforcement industry, and I'm calling it industry, it's a state-sponsored industry. The Office of the Attorney General, 62% of its staff is devoted to collecting child support. It's not devoted to finding out whether the child support is even just. It just takes whatever the judge gives, and they will enforce that. He employs over 4,200 people. Over 2,600 people are responsible for enforcing child support. He has a webpage up that if you are behind in child support, you can be listed as a child support evader. And he will enlist the services of the public. Would you please report this person to us? Now, I've got friends who have gone through this. One of my friends, and I'm going to mention some names because I'm sure they will not mind. Josh Jaros, outstanding man. He was going to be a missionary with New Tribes Mission. If not, he was going to be a youth minister. His wife divorced him, and of course, with a consolation prize from being forcefully divorced, you get child support. They were going to charge him with 3 counts of contempt because he owed less than $2,000. The only reason he owed that little amount was because his parents were sending him their Social Security money from Minnesota to keep him out of jail. Josh is an outstanding man, but he's being punished because he can't pay. And yet he's also there for his children all the time. Somehow this is called being in the best interest of the children when the Attorney General puts him into jail. The interesting thing was at this one meeting that I was at, the Attorney General talked about how much money the state of Texas made by enforcing child support. He bragged that Texas is the #1 state in collecting child support over the past 10 years. Last year, they collected over $4 billion. Another man, a friend of mine, Gabriel Cornejo, paternity fraud. The Office of the Attorney General knows he is not the father of the child, and yet they're trying to extort him for $70,000 in child support. Gabriel is not going down without a fight, and that's good. Another instance in which the Office of the Attorney General is helping to destroy families I've got friends, Michael and Natasha Dry. We've talked about some of the false accusations made against people. Brian Kinter talked about the false accusations made against him. Michael Dry has had these accusations made against him. In this instance, CPS actually, I believe, came to his aid and said he's not guilty of this stuff, and yet the Office of the Attorney General will still try to throw him in jail and prosecute him. Story after story I've been told from people throughout Texas in which the destruction of the family takes place for financial reasons, and it's happening with state sanction. Children's Protective Services, which is what we're here for. 3 years ago, my daughter took my grandson to a hospital because he had a circumcision that got infected. The hospital called Children's Protective Services, and somehow in the course of that, I got blamed. My grandchildren, I was the one that was watching them for about 8 months, almost exclusively. My daughter wasn't watching the kids, my son wasn't watching the kids, my ex-wife was not watching the kids. My daughter would call me all the time to come watch the kids, and my wife. Children's Protective Services knew that we were innocent because when they were investigating my daughter, the reason they stopped the investigation is because they said, you have a grandparent who is a very strong safety net. And yet they would not tell her that I had nothing to do with the call, so I got sued. I have not seen my grandchildren now for 3 years, and that's how I got involved in this. But we talk about Children's Protective Services. I like to call them family destruction services because that's what they do. Last Thursday, we were at a meeting in Austin when they talked about the Department of Protective and Family Services. How do they preserve families? It's a laughable matter. They don't. To most people, when you talk about Children's Protective Services, nothing but fear comes to their mind. To paraphrase Ronald Reagan, some of the most terrifying words in the English language are, we're from Children's Protective Services and we're here to help you. They're not here to help you. They're here to try to take away your children. When I was going to Children's Protective Services begging them to speak out on my behalf, they refused to do so. But you know what the first thing was? Do we need to take the children out of the home? They don't want to help. They want to destroy families. When I first started to testify, it was when Liliana Wright, a girl who had been reported to Children's Protective Services on multiple occasions, was killed because of the failure of CPS. I have another friend, Ron McCall, the same thing happened. Children's Protective Services considered him guilty of sexual molestation, even though there was no evidence in the matter. He had a trial jury, he was found innocent. His ex-wife was able to go home, at which point she shot and killed her son and shot and killed herself. Children's Protective Services. But I think that these failures, as awful as they were, paled in comparison to the destruction that they inflict upon families who are falsely accused. And that's why we're here, because Nancy Schaefer was actually investigating those things, the abuses of the services. I've listened to some of the people here, and I've talked with a few people. Anything that I've gone through pales in comparison to what you've gone through. After listening to Don Rufty and Brian Kinter and then John Gentry, here's what my strategy has been. And I don't know that it's the right strategy, but I do know how, I've talked with a few people and they say it's so embarrassing. We can't talk about this. We haven't even told our church friends because it's embarrassing. It reflects bad on us. When I got falsely accused of reporting my daughter to Children's Protective Services, when I had her sue me, when I had my ex-wife go up there commit perjury against me, when I have not now been able to see my grandchildren as of this point for 3 years, of course it's embarrassing. But there's the point that we need to step outside of our embarrassment and go forward, because as many people have said, we're not fighting this for ourselves. I'm fighting this for my grandchildren, Cruz and Gideon Morgan. If we don't draw the line, what's it going to be in the future? It's going to get worse. I've been impressed by so many people that have spoken that, like I am also a military veteran. And they've said, we swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I've been impressed by so many people of faith. And it seems like sometimes they're being picked on.